Hi, welcome to the Pursuit of Truth. Got loads for you that I've been saving up on Sky News for this last few days, mostly to do with schooling, education, and another one to do with how we see the world that we live in and brainwashing, as it were. So I'll start first with the education one, because it's close to the last Pursuit of Truth that I did, which was about the response from the Department of Education to do with Alina's help letter. I haven't got any more news from the MP or from Alison Jeffries, who's head of the ESCC, East Sussex County Council. I don't know, what was going to happen there now that they're back to school. Let's hope it's better. But it doesn't look like, when we see the news about the education at the moment, it's not looking good for anyone who has to study in this country. Especially if you're neurotypical, then not so bad. But if you're neurodiverse, then it's even worse, because it seems like the system's falling apart. Well, the buildings certainly are. But let's start with this one. This one's about speech and language, which of course is close to my heart because of Alina, and obviously because she's autistic. She has issues with speech and language. It took us ages to try and get someone, I know they're going to blame COVID for that, but it was pre-COVID and after COVID, to try and get speech and language. It's called SALT in East Sussex. I don't know if it's different elsewhere. Speech and language therapy, to try and get them to help. And then you get sessions, and they were cancelled. And I know I've mentioned this previously, but we did go to them. And when she went to them, she actually really did well. And out of all the things that ever been done for Alina, that was the quickest reaction. She learned so much from that. And I wonder if they'd started that when they should have started that earlier on, then how better she may be now at communicating. And of course, a lot of it also is to do with Alina and neurodiverse children, unlike neurotypicals. Their milestones is difficult to see where they should be, because I've noticed that you worry about these things as a parent, and these things just happen. They have their own, like everything has its season. That's the same with children. That you can't expect them all to be the same. But the problem is the education system is based on neurotypicals, and if you're not doing this but that, then that's it. Anyway, this is about speech and language, showing that it's not just Alina that's having this problem.
Now, the government has been warned that without extra speech and language support, children are at risk of failing their exams, struggling to get work, and could even end up in the criminal justice system. New research has found that at least, almost 2 million primary and secondary aged children are now estimated to be behind with talking and understanding. Zadia has more.
Lots of chuckles, but few words. At this nursery in East London, they want to hear more from the children. Jay and his father Viral had resorted to guessing games.
It was more just screaming. Initially it started off by, if he wanted something he would scream, and it was us to kind of code it and figure it out what he wanted. And slowly with different techniques we were able to see, does he want a cup, does he want water?
This experience is shared by parents across the country. It's a problem a children's charity warns that is growing. It says 1 in 5 children are behind with talking and understanding words more than ever before. That means 13% experience short-term speech challenges, and 7% are left with a lifelong condition. And if a 5-year-old struggles with language, they'll be 6 times less likely to pass basic English tests and 11 times less likely to pass maths tests by the time they're 11. This teacher blames lockdown and its effects.
A lot of parents maybe were keeping their children at home even after the country started to open up. So communication was often done through things like laptops, iPads, tablets, whereby children watching a lot of things online. And one of the things we have said to our parents is it's important to actually communicate with your child.
The government says it made £5 billion available.
I shouldn't laugh, but I suspect that the parents were talking to their children. There's a bit of just because people may use technology But yeah, I suppose maybe there are some parents that just hand the phone or tablet and just say, here it is, and then don't speak to their children for the whole day. But I think that's probably very unlikely. It's just one of these sort of things they like try to make out that technology is bad. Anyway.
Communicate with your child.
The government says it made £5 billion available for post-pandemic education recovery. The charity warns more needs to be done.
Without that extra support, these children are likely to fail in English and maths. They're also likely to end up with mental health problems. They're more likely to end up out of work, and they're more likely to end up in the criminal justice system.
Among its recommendations, the charity wants better guidance for schools. It says teaching staff need to be able to spot problems early so that referrals can be made on time. Sadia Chowdhury, Sky News.
But the problem is this is the thing, yeah. This is because obviously they just reporting this story for because they want to fill up some airspace. But the thing is the actual real problem is not the diagnosis. Like with Alina, she was diagnosed pre-nursery, through the. Well, actually pre-nursery, by going to the doctor's appointments. They could see that she wasn't hitting her milestones and thought it might be autism or global development delay. But the thing is, once you do get to all this, and then you go through the speech and language system, it takes ages and ages for them to respond and see you. And I know I mentioned there's many of these pursuits of the truth. It's just another one of these systems. We're in what in the system is called a first world country, but the systems are just so slow, so bureaucratic, so time consuming, and no wonder children are slipping through. I do worry now hearing all that how is Alina going to be? Because she, obviously because of autism and a global development delay, her communication is still very limited. It is getting better, but it's not in the same as a more neurotypical brother who can, you can communicate, 100% conversely with. But the problem is obviously not only, even if they did give her the speech and language therapy, because of autism, global development delay and timing and stuff, it may not have improved. So it's not like I can just say it's, obviously if you have a disability, depending on what it is, that may limit how well you can achieve. But the problem is the other thing is if you want children with these problems to succeed, you also need to change the way the schools are running. Because, most of those children, I suspect, they're autistic. They have a disability. It may not just be because their parents gave them a laptop and said, here, go sit in a corner and don't speak to me. It is because they probably have a disability, and therefore the problem's going to be the world that we live in is very neurotypical, especially the education part of it, and therefore unless you adapt that, unless you have a two-stream kind of system in schooling, and that's not just special school, that's within mainstream school, then it's not going to solve this problem. Anyway, that was the first one. Let's do that. Now the next one, where was it? Oh, I've just reset everything now. Let's go to this one. I think it was this one. Yeah, this is to do with the concrete. I don't know. I always thought when you made a building, that you had to write everything down and file it. No, apparently that doesn't seem to happen. I would have thought that was the case. When you make the plans and everything, that they would do all that kind of stuff. But apparently not. So because there's this RAAC, this aerated concrete that it looks like they knew would last only 30 years. I do wonder why, for public buildings of schools and hospitals, two places where you wouldn't want any kind of, issue with concrete falling down on people, is where they decided to use this stuff that they knew was limited and would need replacing. I don't understand the mindset. That's what I'm questioning. I know journalists seem to be questioning that. Why on earth? I actually did hear, I think Kay Burley mentioned it this morning. Why did they use this material? I expect because it's cheap. They said because it's light, but I expect it's because it was cheaper than proper concrete. I assume proper concrete lasts longer, because then were they really expecting that after 30 years all these schools and hospitals are going to be repaired, and the hassle of all of that. Of course, I suppose if they'd done it in the summer terms, like the government who decided to give this news one day before the start of term for all these schools. Yeah, so here you can hear a bit of this. There's two of them. I'll try and skip through it if it gets a bit boring. I think it starts first with the Prime Minister, who was he was in charge of the finance before he was Prime Minister, wasn't it? So questioning him on how much money and all that kind of stuff, because apparently they're meant to do 50 schools. Is it a year or something like that? And they've only done, since 2021, 4 schools have been repaired. And there's, 100 plus, nearly 200 schools that they've now found that, you can't use those parts of the building. So this is a very slow rate of this is the problem. In this country, everything takes so long to do anything. Even, once you've all talked about it and discussed it and it's gone back and forth, then to do it takes even longer, especially when it comes to building. Oh, dear. So, yeah, let's hear this. This is the world we live in. This is the world we all choose. This is the system we all think so great.
More money from the Treasury, that wouldn't be right. There will be extra money to the school, so the school budget won't be impacted by this. They will be given the extra money to deal with the mitigations. And again, just for context, our expectation is 95% of schools won't be impacted by this. And in the 50 or so schools that have already been mitigated, what we've seen is in the majority of cases, children continue to go to school. They're taught elsewhere on the school estate. And for those that do have to be home, that on average has been just for about 6 days or so. So hopefully people can get a sense that we can work through this relatively swiftly, and we want to minimise disruption on kids' learning.
The Prime Minister speaking earlier, the first time we've heard from him, of course, since Westminster restarted after the summer break. Our reporter Rachel Venables is at a school in Colchester where half of the classrooms have been closed. But first, let's go to our political correspondent, Rob Powell. Afternoon, Rob. This allegation then about cuts to the school rebuilding and refurbishment budget when Rishi Sunak was Chancellor, he says, are completely and utterly wrong. Just fill us in where we are with this.
Yeah, a punchy rebuttal, I thought, from the Prime Minister. But actually, when you look into the numbers that the Prime Minister is talking about in terms of schools being repaired per year and the numbers that this former senior civil servant, former permanent secretary is talking about, actually they align. Because what Jonathan Slater, who used to be the senior civil servant at the Department for Education, is saying is that they believed there needed to be around 300 to 400 schools repaired per year. They said, though, they understood that capacity in the construction industry and also just how money is allocated within Whitehall meant that probably wasn't going to happen. So they were sort of tempering their expectations, but they were still hoping that the initial 100 a year plan would maybe be doubled to 200. But he says that was cut to 50 per year. And if you listen to what the Prime Minister was saying there, he says, look, we announced 500 over 10 years, 50 per year. So the very problem that Jonathan Slater, this former permanent secretary, is putting his finger on is really what Rishi Sunak is talking about in that interview. The justification from the Prime Minister is that this is in line, completely in line, he says, with how many schools were repaired year on year in recent history. I think the problem is that this type of concrete that was used post-war was known to have a lifespan. So what this senior former official is saying is that essentially an extra effort needed to be put in because of the lifespan reaching towards the end of its lifespan for this type of material. And the words he used was it posing a critical risk to life if this was not funded. I think the aim, what the Prime Minister was trying to do in that interview, though, was sort of that dual task of trying to reassure, trying to deflect some of the political damage from him without sounding too dismissive or that he wasn't taking any of this seriously enough. That was why he talked about the overall figures and how this is actually a small percentage of schools. But there are still quite a few unknowns. I don't think there was that much of a convincing answer to why 4 days before the start of term was the soonest that government could have acted in the case of these 100 or so those schools, given that there's been concerns about this concrete known for quite a while. We know that later this week we should get the full list of schools that are impacted. And also on the funding, the Prime Minister backing up what the Chancellor said yesterday in terms of schools getting extra money to make sure pupils can learn in person, but there not being much clarity about whether that is extra money for schools coming from the departmental budget for the DfE, the Department for Education, or whether this is actually extra money going to the department from the Treasury in the first place. I think politically, clearly practically, the primary concern is about the safety of schools and the safety of pupils. But politically, there's a big risk for the Prime Minister and the government here as well. We've already seen the attack line from Labour of 13 years of Tory rule, meaning that the roofs are literally potentially caving in of schools. I think there's a sense that there is going to be longer to go, more to come in this story, more schools that are potentially affected, potentially other public buildings as well. And I think that political attack line of this being the fault, essentially, of 13 years of Tory rule is a damaging and dangerous one for the Prime Minister, and it's one that him and his top team will badly want to try and deflect.
Indeed. Rob, many thanks. So from Westminster, let's go to Colchester. Rachel Venables is there. First day back at school for many pupils, Rachel, but a miserable start where you are. How are they coping?
Absolutely. Well, away from Westminster, this is the reality of this concrete crisis. I'm at Honeywood School here, very near to Colchester in Essex, and the teachers should be getting ready for the start of the new year. Today was always going to be a training day. Tomorrow they were meant to be welcoming in the new cohort of Year 7s coming to secondary school, of course, for the first time, and then the rest of the school arriving from Wednesday. Instead, they got this phone call from the Department for Education on Thursday evening telling them that the risk of the RAAC concrete, this crumbly concrete that's in a huge part of the school building behind me, is of such a heightened risk that they can't reopen fully. So the Year 7's now not starting until Wednesday, and then they're basically going to have to stagger the amount of pupils allowed into the school at any one time, only around 300 or so at a time in a school that normally has 800 pupils, which means a return yet again to learning from home. Only 3 school years at any one time will be able to come to the school once it reopens. It means the teachers have had a panicked weekend. I've seen them packing books into boxes, actually 2 whole corridors, the English corridor, the maths corridor, completely basically shut up due to the risks involved. They're having to replan the timetable, talk to these really concerned, angry in some instances, parents, and at the same time trying to work out how safe or otherwise is this building and how long will it take to get the funding in, to get the workers in to try and make it safe again. And this is just one school. This is just one of the more than 100 schools we know about, with potentially hundreds more out there with this RAAC concrete making things unsafe.
OK, Rachel in Colchester, thank you.
Yeah, then we'll go to the other one now. I don't think I've got this morning, do I?
Safety issue is frustrating. Now, more than 100 schools have been told to partially or fully shut, with pupils due to return today or throughout this week. And the Education Secretary told Sky News it will likely cost millions to fix crumbling concrete at schools right across the country. Well, joining me now is Grania Hallahan, a former teacher and a senior content writer at the Times Educational Supplement. Great to see you this afternoon. Kids back at school then, or certainly many of them are, and still no list yet of the published schools. We spoke yesterday. You said that you hoped it would be coming out soon. Well, the Education Secretary hasn't still put a date on it.
No date. And the news that, only 5% of schools are affected, well, that suggests that there's going to be more than 1,100 schools that are going to be affected. So this suggestion that there's going to be more schools facing closures, more schools that are going to need building work, is the problem just seems to be escalating. And as more schools are applying to the surveys, more schools are letting the Department for Education know they have got back in their schools, they need to have more surveys done. I think we're going to see that number on the list grow and grow.
Yeah, some 1,500 schools haven't returned those surveys used to identify the crumbling concrete. Why haven't schools, head teachers, building managers done this sooner?
Well, the point is that many of the schools have replied and said, we need more help with that. So in that number, there's a significant number of schools who have returned the survey, but have returned it to say, we need more help. And part of this problem is that they do not feel equipped to be able to judge whether or not they have got RAAC in their schools. Also, because of the nature of the material, it's often in places that's very hard to get to or behind panelling. And in the instructions given to schools, it tells them not to touch the panelling because, of course, it's got asbestos in it. And that's a huge risk to people who would be poking around and investigating whether or not they've got this RAAC in their schools. So part of the problem is that the Department for Education has been relying upon school leaders, caretakers, site staff to do this initial survey when, the argument is being made, why did they not send out proper engineers, proper experts to look at these schools in the first place to get a good idea of the size of the problem much earlier on? I mean, we've known about this for a considerable amount of time. It did not take until the week before schools go back to start sitting up and paying attention to it.
Yeah, what do you make of this row between a former permanent secretary to the Department of Education and the Prime Minister? Jonathan Slater saying the government halved the school repairs budget in England when Rishi Sunak was Chancellor, but the Prime Minister today describing that as nonsense.
It's a tricky one. So this is all part of the school rebuilding programme where they were identifying the schools that are most at risk. And this is one of the points that in the National Audit Office that they've been picking at their figures behind here. So if we look at what they've done so far, we're 3 years into a 10-year project. They're meant to have awarded 83 contracts as of March this year, and they've only awarded 24. They were meant to have completed 4 projects, and they've only done 1. So whether or not this figure of 100 schools got slashed to 50, or is, whatever Mr. Sunak wants to say about that, if we look at the bare facts and the numbers of what they've done so far since they started this project, it's quite clear that they're really behind schedule. And because of the mistakes that have been made all those years ago when they didn't give enough money to this project, we can see that we're paying the cost for that now.
What do you say to those in government who say that the steps they're taking are right, but they are being ultra cautious? They're not taking any risks. In many of the schools affected, it perhaps is only one classroom in effect that has to be closed. Surely it's better to be overcautious than undercautious.
Well, I think the school leaders that I've been speaking to have been saying they would have welcomed this caution earlier on. They say that it's the school leaders themselves have been pushing the Department for Education and chasing them for surveys and asking for people to come out and check their schools. If we look at the situation that schools find themselves in, it's the head teachers that are taking the burden of making the rearrangements. They're the ones that are being expected to foot the costs as well. If I think that we listen to the school leaders and to what they're saying about this problem. It's not this, it's not that they're objecting to the caution. They're objecting to how quickly the Department for Education has acted upon this information and given them the support they need. And crucially, financially, schools are being expected to take on the costs of moving the students, of any transport costs, of literally going into those classrooms. It might just be one classroom, but one school leader I spoke to, the classroom that she has affected is her tech classroom. And in a technology classroom, it's full of really expensive bits of equipment, and it's not easy or convenient to get those out. They're having to pay for transportation costs to make those classrooms safe again. So I don't think it's a question of, oh no, that all this caution isn't that dreadful. It's more, we want the money to be able to do this properly, and we wish that you'd have acted upon this sooner because we've been telling you about it for a long time.
OK, we're out of time. Let's leave it there. Gráinne Hallahan, former teacher and writer at the Times Educational Supplement. Thank you.
Yeah. Keep her at the end there because she's speaking too much truth, isn't it? I mean, yeah, it's not really, you can't really, I know they were going to play we're trying to be really ultra cautious, but that's not true because they used this stuff, in the 90s or 50s and 60s, it says in somewhere, and they knew it only lasted 30 years, so that's just maths, isn't it? And apparently there's one MP that's been putting, I think, over 100 times as mentioned in, I don't know if it's PMQs or where, it was on this morning news, that they've been mentioning this issue over 100 times. So that's not really being ultra cautious, is it? If we've known about this for such a long time. Anyway, So there you can see that's the state of education that our children. And of course, I wonder how many private schools are having this issue, if any. So this is the problem. This is public schools. This is, and the thing is, like, it's so important. Education is the most important thing, no matter what you believe. Even if, even like some of the education your kids may be taught may not be factually accurate or 100% truthful or whatever, but to educate a human, from knowing nothing to knowing, to be able to navigate around the world, to be able to make their own assumptions and conclusions and work things out is the most important thing, and it shouldn't be tied to money. This is the thing that I always say, these things, that the money is our problem. Whilst we continue to be in this system of money and this way, the way that we all live, thinking this is the only way, these are the kinds of things that are suffering your children. Each one of us is suffering because of the system that we're choosing to vote in every time. And we're keeping and thinking this is the only way we can be. Well, it isn't historically the only way we've been. We didn't used to be like this. There's been lots of different systems that we've gone through. But what we need to go is a system where we don't have money. We don't need money to do things to help each other. We're human beings. We found ourselves in this place full of all this free stuff, all the material, the gas, the electricity, the water, the air. Every single bit of material that makes anything was freely on this place, and we should have occupied it together, not cut it up, divided it and possessed it in those greedy kinds of things that our forefathers have done. And we should understand that and change that. But the problem is now, how do you kick people off the throne and tell them, it is such a complicated thing that it's probably impossible now to unpack this. But this sort of ties into my next bit, which was this kids thing on Sky News for your information, where they sort of brainwashing, I suppose, is a bit much, but I suppose the thing is, when you live in this system and you only think the system is here, you just protect the system without even knowing it by suggesting that, if we didn't have taxes, we wouldn't have schools, we wouldn't have hospitals, we wouldn't have all these things, we wouldn't help each other. Well, that's not strictly or in any way accurately, factually true. We could do all these things without taxes, without money. We are human beings with all the energy and resources for us. We don't need money, we don't need taxes to help each other. We don't need taxes or money to build houses. We don't need taxes or money to do anything, because everything has been provided to us freely, and the energy that we have is free within each of us to be able to go do those jobs. We could all work and make buildings and houses and infrastructure and have, not need passports and paper documents, and people move freely, and every country have the infrastructure that every country needs, because we have the materials to make every country like like an England or an America. There wouldn't be poor countries and all that stuff. The reason why we have all that inequality, all that division, is because of taxes and money in the system that we live within. So it's just strange that this kids program, I suppose the thing is, like, because you grow up in this and you think, well, this is the only way it is, but it isn't. And it's a shame, really, that they didn't, the children and the adult both say that without taxes, without money, we wouldn't be able to do these things. Well, that's not true. Because as long as there's human beings, and as long as we live on a place where we have all this material that's freely given, trees free, the ground, the air, the electricity, the water, yes, men have come up with inventions to use those materials to make them into different things like silicon and all that kind of stuff, and medicine, but everything is, the resources are free. We didn't have to, they're here for us all of us, not a particular part. So yeah, here's your bit of brainwashing.
You'd be paying more. And if you just don't get how taxes work, then don't worry, because Jariah's been investigating.
Have you ever stopped and wondered where the government gets all its money from to pay for things like schools, hospitals, the police force, the army? Nah, me neither. Until I was asked to investigate. And I can tell you, it all comes down to tax. Believe it or not, there are some interesting facts about the money people have to pay the government. Honest. Oh, and you think people our age have to pay tax? I will reveal all later. First, let's go back in time. to a time when people lived in caves. It was every man, woman, and child for themselves. There were no teachers, doctors, police officers, or soldiers. And come to think of...
Well, but yeah, we didn't need soldiers when we were cavemen because maybe we didn't fight each other. How do you know how cavemen used to live? Maybe they used to get on each other. Did they have teachers? Yes, even before schools, there's always been teaching. That's what we used to do. We used to teach our children. That's, you teach them how to live, how to survive, how to speak and all those things. Maybe not cavemen, but this kind of assumption of here's what we have now, paying money in the system and taxes, and here's the alternative, cavemen who had clubs and sat around a fire and beat each other over the head.
Streets. Over thousands of years, people started to work together. Communities were created, developing towns and cities. A society with teachers, doctors, soldiers, and emergency services to keep us safe. The one thing these all have in common is they cost money. A lot of it. And that's where tax comes in. Hi, Quinton.
Hi, Jorah.
Quinton is a financial expert. So how does tax pay for all these things?
Well, the government, who runs our society and our country, takes a little bit of money from us each month.
How?
Well, take a look at that. When you get a job, you earn a paycheck, and out of each month, you have to pay the government a little bit of your money, and that's known as tax.
So it's our money the government is spending?
Well, over the years, whoever was in charge, kings, queens, and today the government, has a right to collect taxes. In fact, if you run a business, let's say a shop, you have to pay a bit of your profit each month to the government, and that's called corporation tax. In fact, there are lots and lots of different taxes out there, and the government raises an enormous amount each year, about 700 billion pounds. If you wonder what 700 billion looks like, that's 700 with 9 zeros. 000, 000, 000, 000.
That's a lot of zeros. Hands up if you think people our age pay taxes. Nice one if you put your hands up. Yep, even people our age pay taxes. Some things we buy like chocolate, pens and games have an amount of tax included in the price you pay. It's called value added tax, or VAT.
Now, Jiraiya, you might think it'd be massively unfair that we have to pay all that money to the government. But just imagine what things would be like without hospitals and schools and the emergency services and the army.
Thank you so much for your help, Quinton.
Imagine how unfair it is you have to pay taxes, because if you didn't pay taxes, we wouldn't have schools, we wouldn't have hospitals. What utter rubbish and lies they're teaching. Yes, based within the system that we live within, but wait a minute, but not the fundamental truth. If we didn't have taxes, if we didn't pay money, we could still look after each other. We could still buy hospitals. We may not need armies to kill each other because we would just, it's just laughable. But this is the problem. This is what we teach our children. And it's a simplistic argument based on the system that we live in, that it's either cavemen or, or now how it is that you pay your taxes. But not all the problems that come with this. Not all the corruption, not all the issues that we can't help each other with. Because we have this system, we then divide each other countries up and we don't help them, and there's poor people, there's people suffering and dying of not having enough food or not having medicine, all the things that are here that we could do for each other if there wasn't taxes, money and kings and queens and governments. If we were working as one human being, which is what we all are, like other animals work. Aye. Yeah, the same old stories. It never changes, does it? Never changes. And of course we keep teaching our children this is never going to change, because we're going to keep thinking, yeah, this is the way it is. That's the way it is. I'll get a job, get my taxes. Don't worry about all the human beings that are suffering because of this system, because of the greed of these first world countries, because of them wanting to employ the third world or second world countries to make profit for them. And you only got to listen to the 600 Pursuits of the Truth, all the different examples I brought to show how the system that we live in doesn't work. It's not fit for purpose. For humanity, for a loving and caring, humane humanity that found everything freely for us so that we could share with each other. And I know it sounds kumbaya or utopian or whatever you want to call it, but that's because you've been brainwashed to feel that way, because you're used to the certainty of money and taxes and what you can get and what you can possess. But actually look at the truth. When you're born a baby, look at the truth that every animal, everything around you we labelled, that we don't even know why we're here, and all this stuff, and all the things that we don't really know and we take for granted. But imagine, we're all human beings. We only have one existence, one chance, one life. And imagine, if you're lucky to live in a country where you have everything, or you have, your parents have everything, then that's fine. But what about the people that don't? Think about them. Think about the poor people that lives are cut short, that suffer, that go through all the unnecessary things because of money and the system that we live within. That's what we've got to think about, because that's billions of people, billions of wasted lives. And also, even the people that do have so-called good lives, the amount of wasted energy, competing and all this kind of stuff, rather than sorting out, the problems of how to get rid of diseases that we should have got rid of a long time ago if we all worked together, if we didn't put a price tag on it. Anyway, please share if you understand. Take care, take it easy, God bless, and peace.